She almost got arrested right there on our front lawn, cuffed like a criminal in front of the entire neighborhood, because she shredded a $500 HOA fine. And then, in the middle of that humiliation, the cop froze. He looked down at her license, went pale, and whispered, "Wait, General Blake." That single moment flipped the entire nightmare upside down, and I swear I'll never forget the silence that followed. It all started on a Saturday morning, one of those perfect Florida days when the sky is too blue to be real. I was sitting on the porch with a beer watching my wife Rachel trim roses in the garden. She looked like any suburban mom, hair tied back, wearing an old army t-shirt. No one in the cul-de-sac would have guessed she once commanded thousands of soldiers in Afghanistan. That's when I noticed Megan, our brand new neighbor, strolling past. Something about her rubbed me wrong. She wasn't just walking, she was scanning eyes darting across our yard like she was surveying enemy territory. Then, I swear to God, she pulled out this tiny ruler and started measuring the mulch border at our property line. Who even carries a pocket ruler on a weekend walk? 2 hours later, we found an envelope in our mailbox. Official HOA letterhead, heavy paper, like some kind of legal summons. Rachel opened it and her eyebrows shot up so fast I thought they might launch into orbit. 3 separate violations each with citations from obscure bylaws buried 50 pages deep in some appendix no normal person had ever read. 1 fine for non-approved plant species. Another for grass height variation exceeding standards. And then my favorite one for mulch extending 2 inches past the property line. The total, $500. The evidence included time-stamped photos measurements down to decimal points and enough legal jargon to choke a lawyer. Rachel looked at those papers like she was reading enemy intel. Then she marched right outside, walked straight up to Megan, who was just loitering on the sidewalk waiting to watch us squirm, and in her old command voice said, "This is harassment, not enforcement." Megan smiled that smug, condescending HOA Karen smile and offered to help us adjust to community standards. That's when Rachel snapped. She tore the citation in half, then in half again. Pieces of paper fluttered down like confetti across our lawn. Megan's jaw dropped, then curled into this delighted grin as if Rachel had just handed her the weapon she'd been waiting for. She pulled out her phone, snapping photos like she was collecting DNA evidence. I knew right then we were in trouble. Rachel spent that night hunched over her laptop combing through Florida HOA law. She muttered about due process, about appeal procedures, convinced she could fight this with pure logic and precision. And honestly, I believed her. This woman used to keep supply convoys alive under rocket fire. Surely she could handle a suburban HOA. But the first hearing proved just how wrong we were. We walked into what looked more like a courtroom than a neighborhood meeting, podium recorders, the whole 9 yards. Rachel laid out her case like a pro, citations invalid, notification procedures, skipped regulations, ignored. Even the county officer seemed ready to side with her. And then Megan dropped her bomb. In that smooth lawyer voice, she disclosed her background, 15 years as a real estate attorney specializing in HOA law. She produced corrected documentation, certified mail receipts, signed meeting minutes. It was like watching someone sweep the legs out from under my wife in slow motion. The officer ruled against us. Worse, he added Rachel's destruction of official documents as evidence of escalating hostility. Walking out of that room was the first time I saw Rachel look genuinely shaken. Neighbors whispered, some looked at us like we were contagious. Megan had turned a $500 landscaping dispute into proof that Rachel was some kind of dangerous outsider who couldn't adapt to civilian life. And it didn't stop there. Megan called an emergency community meeting, filled the room with PowerPoints about protecting property values. Slide after slide painted Rachel as the problem resident without ever saying her name. Some people, Megan said loudly, think military experience exempts them from civilian rules. The crowd nodded like a bunch of bobbleheads. Rachel stood calm and composed and said she had simply challenged invalid citations through proper channels. Megan pounced on that, lecturing her in front of everyone about how civilian communities require collaboration, not command. The audience actually applauded. Watching my wife, who'd spent 20 years building teams and saving lives, get humiliated like a rookie was brutal. At home that night, she broke down. pacing the kitchen whispering that maybe Megan was right, maybe she wasn't, cut out for civilian life. That's when the real blow landed. A week later, Rachel got a letter her security clearance was under review. Someone had reported her for hostility toward civilian authority structures. Translation: Megan had fed federal investigators a dossier of HOA nonsense twisted into a national security concern. Rachel's consulting contracts froze overnight. She sat at the kitchen table holding the letter with trembling hands, whispering, "They're taking away everything I worked for, and I had nothing to say." We fought. God, we fought. I accused her of letting pride wreck our finances. She accused me of wanting her to roll over. Nights were sleepless cold. For the first time in our marriage, I wondered if this HOA nightmare might actually break us. Then came Lisa. Quiet neighbor, never said much before. She slipped me a manila folder she'd been hiding proof of Megan's racket. Financial records showing HOA violations funneled directly into contracts for her family's construction company. Emails tying Reed Legal Services to enforcement actions. It was a business model manufacture violations rake in cash from both sides. Suddenly the puzzle made sense. But Rachel was done. She sat in the study packing away her medals, whispering that maybe Megan was right. Maybe she was just too rigid for this life. That was my breaking point. I told her, "You commanded convoys through war zones. Don't let some HOA bully convince you you're nothing." For the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of the old fire in her eyes. The showdown came faster than I expected. Megan marched up our driveway one afternoon with another violation notice, this time for intimidating HOA personnel. Neighbors just happened to be outside phones, out ready to record. Megan had staged the whole thing. She spoke loudly, declaring Rachel a danger, and with theatrical flair dialed 911, telling dispatch there was a military-trained resident escalating threatening behavior. She made my wife sound like Rambo about to go off the rails. Minutes later, 2 patrol cars rolled up. Officers Hayes and Harris stepped out, serious, scanning the crowd. Megan handed over her thick folder of evidence, weeks of reports, citations, meeting minutes, even the Federal Review notice. Rachel stood there exhausted, shoulders squared, but I could see the defeat in her posture. She handed over her driver's license without a word. Hayes glanced at it and froze. 5 seconds of silence. Then, wait. General Blake. His voice cracked just enough to silence the crowd. Murmurs rippled. Megan's confident grin slipped. Hayes looked back at Rachel, his tone shifting from suspicion to something like awe. He asked if she was the same General Blake who commanded supply operations at FOB Chapman. She nodded quietly. The shift was instant. Hayes remembered her leadership saving his unit during a convoy attack years ago. His whole demeanor flipped respect-gratitude. Suddenly, he was looking at Megan's file with new eyes, spotting discrepancies, timestamps that didn't add up, witness statements that looked copied and pasted. Harris confirmed the irregularities. The case Megan had built crumbled in their hands. In front of every neighbor, the narrative collapsed. Hayes announced no crime had been committed. In fact, what he saw was a concerning pattern of harassment against Rachel. He offered her resources to document further abuse. Phones that had been recording Rachel's supposed downfall were now capturing her vindication. Megan's empire of intimidation evaporated in real time. And that's where the story ends. Megan standing frozen on our porch. Neighbors whispering, cameras rolling, her carefully crafted reputation disintegrating with every second of silence. My wife, the woman everyone had doubted, stood taller than I'd ever seen her. Sometimes the only way to stop abuse of power is to refuse to bow to it.